There is no such thing as lifetime freedoms. I can recall having jobs over the years, and of course, when I was much younger, there would be individuals, black folk, some black guy, some older black woman would approach me and say, "Hey, you gotta look out for him. You gotta look out for her." And not all the time, but most of the time, the person I needed to look out for was a person in management or supervisor who was Caucasian. And I'm one who thinks a lot. There's been a few who say you think too damn much. But although being warned who to look out for on the job, I noticed that the very person that I'm being warned about, once they came on the scene, walked by, whatever, the person who was warning me would break. They would resume to doing what they're supposed to do, whatever that consisted of. But such sudden movement uh, to disengage conversation, I mean, here you were just warning me. Just their demeanor, the way it changed after laying eyes on the person who is deemed an asshole or the cross, person you have to watch out for, they get you fired. After this pattern, happened often, I got to a point where how long have you been here at this job? And I can recall at least on two accounts, like one person being at 26 years, another person being at like 17 years. And so now my question is, if this person is such an asshole, this person is great at getting people fired, how how did you last that long? I mean, what did you do to survive that? And I had already gotten the answer after seeing their response to the person that they were warning me about. Quickly, they would get back in compliance. And so that's where that piece was born from, compliance. And I began to think about slavery, how I've heard people say, God got us through slavery. And I beg to differ. Um, I am convinced that being compliant is what got many of us through slavery. To deal with a system that involved people that gutted, rooted up another group of people and sailed them over the Atlantic Ocean only to implant them on different land, that's power. Those people are a force to reckon with. And then to break you down, I mean, you arrive as Africans from various villages and tribes. You arrived as Africans, of course, after Jamestown, because based on my research, the first 20 slaves to arrive in Jamestown, 1619, even when they gave birth, the first child was a boy. His name was William. And so after that, it's the breaking down process. You don't speak your language. And I do not believe that, you know, all Africans had what some refer to as dogma, in the sense of believing in a deity. Based on my research, many of those tribes believe that if you do what is right within you and your people, then you'll bring forth good harvest. And that could involve skill, time, passion, invested into what you was doing. Whether that involved harvest, whether that involved war. If you do what is deemed appropriate within your tribe, those lessons, those skills that have been passed on by other men that look like you, then you will bring forth good harvest. You'll win when engaged in war, and you'll bring forth healthy offspring. You know, this narrative that they stripped us of a religion, even now, the entire world haven't heard of a Jesus Christ. Even now, with all this technology. And so to paint this narrative that they came with the religion, it was Islam, where it was, no, that's not what my research rendered. All Africans were not bound to literature, scripts, and the concept of a deity. It was more paying tribute to those who had lived before them. And they didn't even deem them ancestors, fathers, grandfathers. It was that immediate. Ancestor shit is something that African Americans feel empowered by using that. And so even now, it's like African Americans were introduced to Christianity, and then Islam, the Black Power movement. And then at some point, there was an introduction to, Black excellence. Entertainment would save us. And now we're living in an era where Black folk feel that ancestors are conveying a message to them. The ancestors are talking. When in essence, they couldn't overthrow the system in their day. And so when you die, your intellect, that's what you die with, what you know. How in the hell can they convey anything to you that would grant you the know-it-withal to overcome the system that you are confronted with today? And so back to my point, in terms of compliance, that was my conviction. The establishment is starting to listen, or that the people are starting to break the establishment. The establishment has always been outnumbered. But it's about this. It's not always strength in numbers. It's not always strength in numbers. That has been proven time after time after time. First few Europeans arrived, this land was populated by those who were here first. There is a beginning, there is an alpha. There are people who were originally here. But this, and going behind closed doors and plotting while using this, and those people eventually became settlers. And with all this land, we can build something. We can build something. And although slavery is global, it's a universal method, it's universal trade, it's a universal experience. Some of the best slaves arrived from Africa. And so once again, you have this situation where you have a slave owner who he's married with children. And what do? They sleep happily in the big house. Some slaves had the privilege to sleep in the basement of the same house where the slave owners were. And of course, you have what was called the living quarters. There weren't a lot of incidents that involved a Nat Turner. There weren't many attempts like a Denmark Vesey. And so in essence, what did that say? You have slave owners who had 20 slaves, 75 slaves, 120 slaves. And although the slave owner and his wife, 2, 3, maybe 4 children, slept happily and peacefully in their home, in the big house, in those quarters, although they were outnumbered by who slept in those quarters. It's that breaking down, the influence, the power breaking down of people. Those slaves remained in compliance. So many didn't flee. So many didn't revolt. For me, it answered the why for me. And you see that even now being displayed where you have people who work these jobs. They hate these jobs. They hate the leadership on the jobs. But they comply in order to be on that job. 3 years, 4 years, 11 years, 17 years. Although the days of people appearing on job sites now is probably not going to continue to be in the 20s and beyond. If so, there'd be people, consist of the leadership, if they don't incriminate themselves out of greed, or sexual crimes of some sort. The white canvas itself represents white land, white America, white world, and then the black body symbolizes some of the first slaves. And you see the left hand on the left hip symbolizes pain. However, even with that pain, they continue to keep the right hand on their side, compliance. Well, for years I've heard the elderly, the parent, um, the uncle, the aunt say things like, well, I'm just going to turn you over to God. And too often, the person who was left in the hands of God succumbed to a death, early death, fell to incarceration, which oftentimes led to struggles, homelessness, due to the fact that they were convicted felons. And so waiting on God, it speaks volumes. It's touchy. A lot of people have waited on God to intervene in their marriages, um, and it dissolved. It crumbled. In some cases, until death do you part, some people were murdered in their marriages. People have placed their finances. I'm going to put God in my finances. I'm waiting on God to touch my finances. I've been tithed and offered for decades. And I'm waiting for God, waiting on God to change my financial status. People feel to realize you have a role you have to play. And if you're not going to play a role, you have to be able to stomach discarding, whether it be your marriage. I've told some mothers that, your child don't belong to you. Your child belongs to the streets. Yeah, he or she may have your last name, may have your features, but your child doesn't belong to you. And that's hard for especially a mother to hear. And so you have to be willing to either stay in it, deal with the insults, deal with the manipulation, or just discard it, take your hands off. But this idea that God is going to intervene and I'm going to wait on God, no, you have a role you got to play. And if you can't play that role, if you're not going to play that role, your only option is to discard the situation, the relationship. And for a lot of people, it is, of course, it's difficult, especially when you speak in terms of a mother, giving birth to a child. But the reality is there are a lot of mothers who have lost sons and daughters who couldn't deal with them. And their only response was, I'm just going to put it in God's hand. And you know what the results were. Your marriage, I'm going to put it in God's hand. There's so much pride in these relationships now. whether it be a common law marriage or a marriage. Just gonna put it in God's hand. And in essence, what a lot of people do is they put it in their, especially women, they put it in their girlfriend's hand, their aunt's hand, their mother's hand. And these women shatter their own relationships. Because in essence, when you're doing this about your situation, you are in essence putting this in the hands of somebody else, female, girlfriend, auntie, mother, sister. And so, yeah, a lot of people are dying. They will continue to die waiting on God. And so you can see you have the elderly individual with their hands raised up to the heavens. Next to that individual are two children playing. There's always going to be some who don't take the situation serious. And they're reared by this individual who cries out to God. Here's a tithe and offering. People fail to realize that when you pay tithe and offering, you just, you in essence are like purchasing something that hasn't changed your life yet. You're making investments in an organization that hasn't brought about change in your life. And then we have the wedding bands here. And of course, the Bible. All those highlighted scriptures that people quote and they attempt to live by. And then you have the curious one who is just curious as to, when would that change come? This is generational.